and God just threw me to her into her ministry, but I'm going to turn it over and let her talk about her and her ministry.
Hi everybody, my name is Tiffany Bowman-Kemper. I want to start off by thanking Tammy for having me here today, and I want to thank the other speakers who have shared their strength and their hope and the stories about how powerful forgiveness actually really is. There's such a power in forgiveness, and it took me a long time to realize that. God tells us in Hebrews 8:12, "For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness. Their sins and inequalities I will remember no more." And in Matthew 5, verse 7, he says, "Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy." Why can't we keep it that simple, right? If I could have kept life that simple, I probably would have bypassed a whole lot of pain in my life, a whole lot of suffering in my life. I don't know about you, but for the majority of my life, I walked around angry, and I justified that anger. It made sense to me. But first I want to take a really good look at what justifiable anger really is, if you think about that. They define it as a sense of moral outrage at injustice in this world. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think outrage and moral should even be in the same sentence, much less used in the same context. I spent the majority of my life angry, and I will tell you that I truly believed that I had every right in the world to be angry. I truly believed that my anger made sense. The majority of my life, growing up in that anger, justifying it, I made myself believe that those things were real. And I'm going to give you just a really brief rundown on how I justified my anger. I grew up in an alcoholic family. My dad was super abusive. I saw DV every day of my life, probably. My mom stayed in a marriage, and we saw that as children growing up. I didn't understand that. Why would you stay? I carried that for a very long time. And then my senior year in high school, I got very, very sick. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. It was back in the 80s. I was tested for AIDS and hepatitis, and I was given 8 months to live, and it was excruciating. I didn't get high school graduation. I didn't get prom. I spent about a year and a half in the hospital. The autoimmune disease attacked my joints. I've had 89 operations to date. 12 hip replacements, 9 knee replacements, my hips, my shoulders. So along with all that came anger and fear. I was a 17-year-old who went from about 117 pounds to 178 pounds in 8 days. And I was covered in scars and stretch marks, and I had no identity anymore. I lost who I was. So when all that started, I was angry, I was afraid, I had insecurities, and I was in very, very serious pain. My motto was, "You would be angry too." It was justified, it made sense to me. I felt like it was okay for me to be angry at that. I was raised Catholic and went to private school. And you would think at a time when my family should have drawn closer to God. I mean, we were that family. We went to church every Sunday. We didn't miss Sunday Mass. My dad was a coach in intramural sports. They paid for private education. We were that family. But we were also that family that when they should have run to God and asked God for answers, everybody got mad and turned away. That justifiable anger. My mom was a nurse. She was an ICU nurse. She knew how sick her daughter really was. It had to be excruciating to live with the fear of what was going to happen to her little girl. My dad worked 2 jobs because the hospital bills were piling up, astronomical, to the millions. I was in the hospital for almost a year and a half, with no exaggeration. So in between working 2 jobs and my mom doing what she was doing, and then spending every moment after that by my bedside because they didn't know if I was going to make it. there comes that emotional exhaustion, mentally, physically, financially. The family was being pulled apart and devastated. Oh, and then I have a brother, a younger brother, who now is instantly invisible because life centered around Tiffany and her disease. I had every right to be angry. My mom and dad did the best they could. They couldn't be in 10 different places. So here we have an entire family that was just angry. And everybody was justifying that anger. And when I tell you it made sense, it really made sense. Every one of us could make sense of why we're angry. And so, I mean, come on. In the Bible, it even tells us that Jesus gets angry. But I'm going to share you something. In Matthew 21, verse 12 through 14, it says, "And Jesus entered the temple, and he drove out all those who sold and bought in the temple, overturned the tables of money chargers, and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, 'It is written, my house should be a house of prayer, but you made it a den of robbers.' The blind and the lame came in to the temple, and he healed them." Jesus was angry, and his anger was toward those who were buying and selling in the temples. It was justified as righteous anger. He was standing up for the truth of who God was and what God's purpose was. My justifiable anger, my family's justifiable anger, I'm sure your family has justified anger, and you know those angers that I'm talking about. We've heard some of those angers here today. It didn't revolve around God or what God stood for. It usually centered around that moral outrage that I talked about at the beginning. I felt feelings of something wrong having happened to me, something not going my way, things not happening the way life was supposed to happen or we intended it to happen. I don't need to go into the semantics of whether it's right or wrong, because I feel it's kind of irrelevant. What I think is relevant is the bitterness that came with that justifiable anger that led to a whole lot of bad behaviors, poor choices, and a sense of entitlement. It was those things that led my life in a downward spiral. Excuse me. It was those feelings that led me to unhealthy relationships, wrong motives, self-centered motives, that entitlement that said I deserved this. You would do it if you were me. That victim status, because you should feel sorry for me. I lived through hell. I didn't deserve that. I was a young kid. I didn't do anything wrong. I hadn't even started living a life of sin. The insecurities. Oh, and then addiction. The thing I said I never do, because I watched my dad beat my mom every weekend. That addiction became my coping mechanism. The one thing that I said I would never do became the way I coped with life. I'm not going to go into the details of all the poor choices that happened, because that evolved from that sense of entitlement, because that's where it all came from. I was entitled to feel the way I felt. My consequences were probably the same as all of yours when those feelings of justifiable anger happen. You break laws, you hurt feelings, you break rules, you have an emptiness, you start living with shame and guilt. It was those consequences and feelings that led to even more bad choices, bigger choices. I put myself in situations that became dangerous. Living in environments that I once would say would be totally unacceptable became okay. I've been beaten. I've been raped. I've been arrested. I've been in car accidents. I've been handcuffed and put in jail multiple times. I've lost family. I didn't lose family, I gave family away. Friends, jobs, college educations. I was okay with couch surfing to survive. Before I knew it, these were the things that I was saying was okay, because I had to make sense of it. How did I get there? A justifiable anger. I was entitled to feel that way. I was entitled to feel like a victim. Something really bad happened to me. I was a young kid. I grew up seeing things I shouldn't see. A justifiable anger put me in places that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. There comes a point in time when you become too afraid of living, but you're too afraid to die. It's no longer fun. It's no longer the answer. And it no longer makes sense. Do you remember when I said at the beginning that my anger made sense? My journey took me to a place where my anger didn't make sense anymore. Nothing made sense. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And believe it or not, for people like me, that's a really good place to be. But nothing changes if nothing changes. For me, the secret to change was not focusing all of my energy on fighting the old, but it became about building the new. I was tired of fighting the old. I was fighting battles that weren't even mine. I decided I had to do something different. Now earlier, remember when I mentioned my dad was a raging alcoholic? I failed to mention that he got sober when I was 12 years old. I failed to mention that because just like in my life, I never told anybody about the good. Because if it didn't justify my anger, it didn't give me an excuse to be the victim, I probably didn't let you know that. Or I was super quick to change the subject. Because that's the way I learned to live. I can manipulate those things. I decided that I couldn't do this anymore. Part of my change started with me taking away chemicals. I started going to meetings. I started hanging around new people. I started trying to find passions again. I still wasn't going to church, because I was still pretty mad at God. And of course that was justified. I wasn't quite there in my journey. But I was doing something different. It has to start somewhere. Yes, I will tell you that that was where my first encounter with forgiveness, the power of forgiveness, really started. And yes, I was 31 years old. I mean, what did I need forgiveness for? Bad things happened to me. What did I need forgiveness? Why did I need forgiveness? Really bad stuff happened. No way. Stuff that I would never be able to forgive. This is where I realized that sometimes we get the test before we get the lesson. But it was on that exact platform that you can build true faith. That's when I started to build my faith. You can become angry and bitter. You don't have faith. You don't have hope. You don't have anything but emptiness inside. And all of the speakers have shared on that today. Everybody has shared on that today. This is where part of my journey starts, where I stopped being a victim. And that was shared on. and I start being victorious over life, over the obstacles that came my way. And for me, it began with acceptance. And let me tell you why for me it began with acceptance. Because mistakes, whether they were mine or yours, needed to be forgiven. But in order for me to forgive them, I had to accept them and become accountable for them. So that's why my journey of forgiveness started with acceptance. I had to be able to accept, whether they were your mistakes or my mistakes, I had to be able to accept the fact that that's what they were. Once I was able to accept them, I was able to understand. Forgiveness became about finally giving up hope that my past would change. It's crazy when God was laying this on my heart, and I was telling Tammy earlier, almost what everybody shared is being pulled into what I'm sharing with you guys now. And we didn't talk before this. God works in funny ways. Forgiveness wasn't about saying what happened to me or anyone else was right or wrong. It was about giving God the situation. He was equipped to handle it. I can't, he can. I think I'll let him. I used to hear that a lot in meetings, and I roll my eyes. I didn't want to keep standing in the way of finding true happiness. Even today, I see that if I take back a little bit of anger, it takes away a little bit of my joy. I'm still human, that's what happens. Real forgiveness, though, it had to start with me, and that was shared. I could not forgive anyone else until I owned my part. And when I owned my part, it gave me a true perspective of my situation, and it was shared about perspective earlier. When I owned my part, I could see the real perspective of the pictures that were happening in my life. It helped me see that my situation probably was way less complicated than I made it out to be. Okay, follow me for a minute. We don't have control over people, places, and things, and that was talked about. The only thing I have control over is my attitudes and my actions. So, if we're blaming people, places, and things, and we have no control over those people, places, and things, I'm pretty sure absolutely nothing is going to change. But if the only thing I have control over is my attitude and actions, and then I'm going to take accountability for that, I promise you things will change. So that's where my accountability started, and that's where my forgiveness started, and that helped me forgive me. Once I started seeing the results of forgiving myself, I noticed my behavior patterns starting to change. I noticed my choices were getting better. I noticed that there was less guilt and shame in my life. And I carried a lot of guilt and shame for a lot of years. And then they said I could finally go on to the next step of forgiveness, and that was forgiving others. I put on my brakes. Because then again, there was that something I was surely never going to do, or something I surely didn't have to worry about, was forgiving others, because, like I said, you've heard it, bad things have happened to me. That didn't, rapes, being beaten, that kind of stuff didn't deserve forgiveness. Right? I mean, you guys have to feel somewhere in there are things that you would go to your grave saying that you probably never forgive. So, it was also pointed out to me all the mistakes that I made in my life, all the wrongs that I did, all the bad choices. How could I not forgive someone else for their mistakes? Why were their sins more unacceptable than mine? Right? us back to Matthew 5, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy. So holding those grudges didn't make me stronger. It made me bitter. It kept my anger alive. Forgiving doesn't make you weak, it sets you free. I was learning this as my journey went on. And I had been held hostage long enough by bitterness that forced me into a survival mode. Freedom of forgiveness allowed me to start living. It didn't come to this conclusion in one day. It didn't happen overnight. It took an army of people. And it took years of experience for me to truly value the power of forgiveness. A lot of this came from those tests, whose lessons came on his time, not mine. I talked about that platform of faith that occurs when those tests and delayed lessons happen. It was this platform that helped me remain teachable. It was those people that reminded me often on my journey of some very important things. That the easier, softer way was not always right. That I didn't have to know you to hurt you in my addiction, and if I knew you, I'd probably hurt you even worse because you let me. And I don't say that with pride. I say that because that's where anger took me. If I was having a bad day, week, month, you were going to have a bad day, week, or month. Because that's where anger took me. Those same people taught me that if I put myself in the other person's shoes, so I could better understand why they were behaving the way they were behaving, it would be better for me to understand where they were coming from, and I wouldn't have to take it personally. They also reminded me that I wasn't that important. People weren't just out to get Tiffany. Maybe, just maybe, they were having a bad day. Like the bad days that I had for 12 years of my life when I hurt you. Maybe, just maybe, they were human and having a bad day. That I wasn't that important and the whole world wasn't out to make Tiffany's life a living hell. But when you're in victim status, that's very easy to go there. Very easy to justify. Those people reminded me of that. That army of people that saved my life reminded me of that on a daily basis. All of a sudden, these things that began to put forgiveness in a perspective for me. And eventually, there was less need for forgiveness because I wasn't allowing myself that justifiable anger anymore. I wasn't allowing that in my life as often. Now, that's not to say that bad things don't happen. Once I started learning about this forgiveness thing, once I started applying this forgiveness thing in my life, it didn't mean that bad things stopped happening to Tiffany. What it meant was those bad things lost their power to ruin my days, my months, my years. So it didn't mean they stopped, just meant they lost the power of controlling how I felt. Since forgiveness, there's been little or no need for justifiable anger because I have tools today. I understand why someone's behaving a certain way, why something's happening. I can take ownership for things. I can own my part. I can right my wrongs. And I can move forward since I started applying forgiveness. Since learning the value of forgiveness, there's been things in my life that I've lost. Like I said, those bad things have happened. I was 10 years sober, and my husband of 5 years, who was 7 years sober, decided to put a needle back in his arm, and he relapsed. With 10 years sober, I lost absolutely everything. I lost my best friend. My kids lost their stability, lost my dream home. We had a ride with 2 fancy cars in the driveway. We were foster parents. He left me with a negative bank account and his daughter. Trust and believe I drank and drugged over way less in my life. I justified way less stuff in my life. Poor me, poor me. But because of forgiveness, there was no entitlement this time. I wasn't entitled to be angry because I didn't have that right. I knew where it was going to take me. Don't get me wrong. Those feelings came back. And I wanted to yell and scream at the rooftops. And I wanted to be super mad at people. And I wanted everybody to know how terrible he was and what did he do to his family. Those thoughts crossed my mind. But because of forgiveness, they didn't stay. They were quickly replaced with that new perspective that Tammy talked about. I was able to put things in perspective a lot faster than I was in my past. It was a learning process. But as I took my sense of entitlement away, my behaviors were less damaging. There was less shame, there was less guilt. Forgiving became easier. I'm going to tell you why forgiving became easier. Because I was actually able to focus on the situation that needed forgiveness instead of all those negative behaviors that I would have been doing because of a sense of entitlement. So forgiveness became easier the more I started applying this in my life. Because I could actually focus on the situation at hand that I needed to be working on to forgive. Instead of all these negative, horrible behaviors that I used to pick up and adapt so I didn't have to forget. It's crazy how it all comes full circle. I was able to see the big picture. I thought I moved to Lake of the Ozarks to be Kevin Mayer's wife. When God knew the whole time I moved to Lake of the Ozarks to be Emily Mayer's mom. He knew the big picture. Forgiveness helped me own my part in my marriage. It made me show that I may have made mistakes there, but I was not accountable for his relapse. He had choices. We talked about those choices earlier, just as I had choices. And I'm going to show you that there were 2 different responses and 2 different outcomes to the very same situation. My husband justified his anger. He was a victim. He ran on his own will. He escaped through drugs and alcohol, and he placed blame. I forgave. I became accountable. I stayed sober. I lived for the message, and I used God's will. The outcome, he's still using. He's in and out of prison. He's lost respect, lost jobs, lost family. He's hopeless and broken. Today, I sit here, 16 years sober. I have an amazing life, a great career, a bonus daughter who still calls me mom. Respect, hope, and gratitude. That's the difference. 2 different outcomes because different responses. And forgiveness was the center of that. Forgiveness and lack of forgiveness. My last and most recent forgiveness came into my life in 2018 in the form of a tall, dark, and handsome country boy. Amen, right? He was funny and cute and talked like I didn't even understand the words that came out of his mouth. Like smitten and hurty and yonder, and I'm a city girl. Like I didn't even know what those things were. But it made me giggle, for real. Like every time he talked, he made me giggle. And I enjoyed his company. And later it was revealed over dinner that he needed to explain something to me. I really can't shock Tiffany, I'm telling you that right now. He succeeded. Long story short, his humble and simple ways stemmed from a very different source than mine. I got humble through God in recovery. Joshua was humbled by 16 years in the federal penitentiary. I drove home from that dinner that night, shaking my head at God's sense of humor. Because when I met this man, tall, dark, and handsome, had a tattoo on his body, looked like the boy next door, here I am covered in ink from head to toe, broken every law known to man probably. But he was the one that spent 16 years in the federal penitentiary. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. It made no sense. I was supposed to be the bad person in this relationship, to be judged book by cover, like we were talking about earlier, like Anna talked about. I was the bad. This was not supposed to turn out that way. I broke laws for years of my life. He was a 16-year-old. He was drinking beer on backcountry roads and broke into a veterinarian clinic and stole a lot of money. He did a juvenile camp, but because of the amount of money, he was put on federal probation for 5 years. He married his high school sweetheart. Had 3 kids, but his mother-in-law hated him because he was one of those boys that was caught up in that stuff. So she called the law. It was hunting season. They got into an argument. She knew he had a loaded shotgun in his truck. Of course, the law knew who he was, and they waited for a warrant. He was 23 years old, and it was right around 9/11, and they sentenced him to 192 months in the federal penitentiary. I didn't believe it, because if I remind you, I grew up with DV. I worked, at this time I even worked in a DV shelter as a peer specialist. I heard stories of men that beat their wives every single day of their life. Their mom was beaten. My dad never went to jail. This was one really, it just didn't make sense. Like, why would this man go to jail for having a loaded shotgun? But that's what happened. He was 23 years old when he went into prison. A 23-year-old young, naive country boy. He got out of prison when he was 37 years old. I'm going to tell you, I bet you some really bad things happened to that man. And he didn't have anger. And he was the sinless, happiest heart I've ever known. And I have a thing for helping broken people. And I enjoyed his company. I was just not going to fall in love with him because we're not on the same page in our life. I fell in love with him. And there's a lot of truth behind you don't know how damaged somebody is until you fall in love with them. And it was then that I really truly realized how damaged people get from being institutionalized. 16 years is a lot of years. This is in total adulthood. And again, another one of those things that I can make sense of. Communication. Inmate to inmate, CO to inmate. It's all very negative. He didn't know how to handle money. He didn't have money. He had low self-esteem and low self-worth and didn't think he deserved anything. And then there was the cheating and the lies, because I'd gone out and sowed my wild oats. I'd gone out and been silly and crazy. He was locked up in prison. Made sense. My problem was that because of my education, because I was where I was in my life, I could make sense of it, but it didn't make it right. Just because I understood why he was behaving a certain way didn't mean I deserved to be treated that way. And the bottom line was, I wanted him to believe he deserved the life we were trying to find. He didn't believe he was right or deserved it. He tried. He really did. He tried. And the cheating stopped. We were getting places, and it was the holidays, and he was acting very, very strange. I've been clean for a long time at this point, so you're gonna be drunk or high around me, I promise you, I'm gonna probably know. And I asked him what he was doing, and he said he missed his daughters. I was super close with my kids. And, somebody at work was giving him K2. K2 wasn't around when I partied. I partied with cocaine and alcohol. And, it was referred to as synthetic marijuana, is what they said. This was a big old country boy whose brain was melting right in front of me every time he did it. It was the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen. But I had boundaries, and with 14 years clean and being in my mid-40s, I was done picking up the pieces of my life. He knew my husband had relapsed, and drugs were not and would never be a part of my life ever again. And he had to go. It wasn't even a maybe. That wasn't that. We're not in the same place. You don't belong in prison, but you don't belong with me. Go on your way. And Joshua left. On January 5th, 2020, Joshua walked in my front door, high as a kite. I had worked all week. I was done. I was tired. I was over it. And I looked at him and he was so high. And you know how you just, that straw that breaks the camel's back. I'm just done. You should probably leave, because this is not going to work out for you. It's really going to work out bad. Just go. And because I was tired, because he was high, it didn't turn into a responding, communicating. It turned into a reacting, and there was yelling and screaming and just leave, please just leave. You know how you pop your kid in the back of the head or you pop your dog in the butt? Get out. I did that to Joshua, and he was high on K2, and he had been in prison for many years, and I guess in jail you hit people in the head, and it was an instant trigger. And before I knew it, I was pinned against the wall, being beaten in my head. Inches away from my life. I looked up at him, and his last punch caught my face. It broke 2 bones in my face. It knocked out all my front teeth, and I had bleeding on the brain. But it saved my life, because my living room turned into a forensic crime scene. I had 14 years clean. How did I get here? But when he hit me and the blood flew, he came out of this blackout rage, and we both looked at each other and said, how did we get here? How did this one night happen? Why? Why didn't I just leave a long time before that? Why did I want to change him? Why couldn't I just accept that we were on that same page? We looked at each other, and he drove away, and he knew he was going back to prison. He ran from the cops for about 8 days. And we both knew at that moment our lives were going to change forever. This man never said a cross word to me, never looked at me wrong. My mom and dad have been married 48 years, and my dad treats my mom like a princess. Not that I ever wanted that again with Joshua, but there was the way it ended. It was, oh my God, how did I get here? It was so open-ended. I've been beaten. I've been left on the side of the road for dead. This time it was different. I wasn't angry, I was sad. I played a part in it. I wasn't the victim. There were parts of that night that the outside world didn't know, that weren't captured in the pictures of the crime scene, that didn't show my beaten face covered in blood. And some of those nights, some of those topics, some of those things were relevant. was a really long process of having to go to court. And you know, when you're a victim, you get to be a victim. You get to write a victim statement. And I wrote a victim statement every time. What I'll tell you is, I never got to read it. But in this process, I was learning and applying forgiveness and healing and seeing a counselor. Last time I was beaten and drunk and drugged for 12 years. I didn't deal with it. The outcome was very different. I couldn't understand why they wouldn't let me read my statement. No one understood why I was advocating for this man. I wasn't. I was advocating that the truth be told, so that a decision could be made, and then God would give me the strength to be okay with whatever his consequences were. But I wanted my side of the street clean, because I did play a part in that night. I could let him pass out and would have left in the morning to change the lock in my house. I would have never heard from him again. That's not how that night played out. Not at all. I prayed to God. He helped me forgive. He helped me walk through this. He helped me see the truth. Never being able to hear my side, I wrote the judge a letter. The prosecuting attorney was going to give him 25 years to life. I would have never been able to sleep at night. My conscience would have never been clear. I would have never been able to forgive myself, and that's where the forgiveness starts, right? I would have never been able to forgive Tiffany because I just walked away. 2 days after I wrote that judge and explained what I had been trying to explain for 18 months, Class A felony, 25 years to life, dropped down to Class B felony, 7 years. How crazy is that, right? I could accept that. He deserved consequences for that night. I didn't want it to be free. I just wanted the truth to be heard so that the right choice was made. That's all I wanted. No one ever heard that from me. All they heard was, why are you advocating for a man that almost killed you? And the prosecutor said to me, I don't understand why you did what you did, and I know that you believe in things, and you stand up for what you believe in. I know your story has never changed. And I know you believe this man can change. And I hope you're right, and I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. And I said, can I ask you a question? And he said, absolutely. And I said, I do believe in what I did. I do believe in advocating for the truth. I do believe walking with God to the end, no matter what that looks like. If you believe in what you do so highly, so immensely, how do you go from a Class A felony, 25 years to life, to a Class B felony, 7 years? How is that okay if you believe in what you do? And he threw his pen down and he walked out of the office and he said, I'm coming from this one camera. And I walked outside to my car, and the advocate, because you get an advocate in a DV situation, followed me out. She said, I don't think I did you any justice, Tiffany, and I'm sorry. I've never met anyone with more integrity in my entire life. And I'm going to use your story. And I gave her a hug and I said, if that's what all this was about, then please use my story. And I put the top down on my car because I have this thing with convertibles. It's my time with God. I don't need nothing in life but my dogs and my convertible. Can see what God does around me. And I drove home, and it was the first time in probably 2 years that I had a sense of peace. A peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had forgiven myself. I got to become accountable. This was a lonely part of my journey. I was at a job in Rollo that I hated, in a town where I didn't know anybody. My kids were far away. I left my job at the DV shelter because I couldn't tell them that they couldn't miss their abuser. And I wish I had one more conversation with Josh because I wasn't a hypocrite anymore. So I left that job because I don't want to live as a hypocrite. I was tired of life of sin, and that's part of sin. And I didn't want to have to tell that to people. So I left. And I'm in a place where the kids are gone. No one understood my way of thinking. How could you advocate for that man? No one truly realizing that I was advocating for the truth, for real forgiveness, and for God's faithfulness. That's what my advocation was in those 2 years. That's what I was advocating for. 2 weeks after it was all over, I get an email from the cafe, the director, asking me about a program in St. Louis that she wanted to expand out in this region. Recovery, reentry, and faith. 3 things that I'm passionate about, all in one platform. So if you're wondering how this silly, crazy tattooed lady who belongs in the city somewhere is standing up here on a tiny little stage in Mount Grove, God put me on a platform because I never faltered in forgiveness. I never faltered in trusting His plan. And today, I get to share with women every single day how to build that faith, how to learn to forgive, how to understand boundaries, how to trust God. Because the hardest part about trusting God is trusting God. Because I walked that walk, one of the loneliest times in my life, God rewarded me in ways I could never dream possible. Forgiveness isn't about saying that it's okay or it was right. It was about a freedom and not staying stuck in bitterness. If you wait to forgive until after you heal, you're never going to heal. Because to heal properly, you have to forgive. I get to teach people how to heal. What it all boils down to, we've all asked ourselves, have I really forgiven them? Oh, I've forgiven them. Wait a minute. We've all second-guessed ourselves. Did I forgive that? Yeah, I did. Oh, maybe not. And then something happens and it pops back. And I'm going to tell you how you know when you've truly forgiven. You will truly know you've forgiven when you can tell God thank you for the lesson in the experience. That's when you've truly forgiven. When you can tell God thanks for the turmoil, or the hurt, or the pain. Never forget. Please, forgiveness won't change your past, but it will change your future.